As a criminal defense attorney, I spend most of my life looking up at the bench. From my side of the lectern, the judge is often the final arbiter, the person holding the scales, the one who decides whether a life is put on pause or given a second chance. We see the gavel, we hear the rulings, and we respect the robe. But we rarely see the person behind the robe. For all the pageantry, the power, and the deference, judges are just like the rest of us. And while the robe confers unbelievable power to its wearer, it doesn't come with an instruction book. So what does it actually feel like to hold that kind of power? To sit in chambers after a sentencing hearing and wonder if you got it right? In a system that demands cold impartiality, where's the room for empathy? And what is the difference between a judge who simply follows the rules and a good judge who understands the weight of the human stories unfolding in front of them? Hello, I'm David Bell, and this is Lens of a Lawyer. Today we're stepping behind the bench to learn from a very experienced judge, and now mediator, about how making decisions from the bench can offer us guidance as we make decisions in our own lives. It is my great pleasure to welcome retired Judge John Torrence. All rise. Judge, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You and I started our professional paths in a similar way. We go to law school, and then we became lawyers. I've kind of stayed with that path. You left that to become a judge. And I think a lot of our listeners don't kind of understand that process. And I guess my first question is, why did you decide to make that move? And then the second kind of question is, what's the process that you go through to become a judge?
Well, I had been practicing for about 20 years. In I guess 2000, there were, and this happens in spurts, it seems like, in Jackson County anyway. You hit times where all of a sudden there's several vacancies on the bench. Just, it's random. But at this particular time, there were, I think, 4 or maybe even 5 vacancies over the course of about 9 months. And I had, by then, had a couple of friends who had gotten appointed to the bench. And I started thinking, you know what? I think I could do that, and I think I would like to do that. My first 6 years practicing was as a lawyer in the public defender's office, and I just found that kind of service richly rewarding, and it's something I enjoyed doing a lot. So that's kind of what motivated me. And so I filled out an application and made a panel and got appointed. That process, in a nutshell, is known nationally and internationally sometimes as the Missouri Plan. It started out of some would say, chaos of the political bosses in St. Louis and Kansas City in the 30s, who had a great deal of influence on the selection of judges, certainly at the state appellate Supreme Court level.
And the impact of it, I can tell you from my perspective, when I appeared before you in Jackson County in Division 14, I didn't have to worry about whether I donated to your campaign. There is no donation to campaign because there's no campaign. Whereas if you're in more of the rural areas that don't have the Missouri Plan, the judges run for election just like other politicians do. And it's a goofy thing to the idea of wondering, did I vote, did I donate or not? It creates it politicizes it more, which I guess is part of potentially the reason for the Missouri Plan. I'm wondering, when you went to go from defense attorney or attorney to judge, was there a concern about the switch of the role? Because certainly I have to try to anticipate what you as a judge is going to do when I'm a criminal defense attorney, but my role is to advocate for my client. Certainly I want to figure out what happened, but to advocate. But when you become a judge, you're taking on a totally different perspective than a defense attorney or a prosecutor. And so was there ever a concern about whether you would have that perspective and then kind of the weight of it all?
Well, certainly you have a great deal of concern about learning the job because you don't naturally know it. You think you do, turns out, when you get there, because if you were a lawyer that practiced in front of judges and did a lot of litigation, you had a lot of experience with trial work. You know how judges do things. You learn how different judges do things differently. Some you like, some you don't like. So you learn, at least to some degree, by example, but I think there's so much of it you don't realize that's going on with the day-to-day duties of a judge until you get to the other side of it and you realize that there's more to it that you really never noticed as a lawyer. So there's a real learning curve. I always thought and still think it takes a minimum of 4 to 5 years to really get your sea legs, I would call it, where you really have figured out sort of the basic ins and outs and the duties and responsibilities you have and how to carry them out.
So, what kind of misconceptions do you think people have about judges? And is there something about your role that, as a judge, when you were a judge, that people might find kind of surprising?
Oh, I don't know about surprising. I think it's common, when you go to the courthouse as a lawyer or as a litigant or as a witness, and you walk by a courtroom and the lights are off, you think, that lazy bum.
he's out golfing or something.
Yeah, he's playing golf, fishing somewhere. There's a lot more to the job that I think people don't realize in the context of reading, writing, research. There's a lot of heavy lifting that goes into the job. I mean, I on many occasions wrote a judgment that was 50, 70, 80, 100 pages, 150 pages.
Wow.
That takes time. And you want to do it right. Of course, you don't want to be wrong about it. So you want to do all the stuff that you need to do to properly write a judgment and issue your findings and have it comply with whatever the statute or the law is. So there's a lot that goes into it other than sitting in a courtroom.
Well, I know a lot of my clients they look to the courtroom as where everything happens. And I try to explain to them there's a theatrical part to it. And certainly some things do happen in the courtroom, but I think they get kind of enamored with the TV shows as to the big moments happening there when the reality is a lot of it happens outside of the courtroom. For example, myself dealing with prosecutors, and you're in there, you may have a 150-page judgment coming down. That's going to come down by you going in the back in chambers and spending hours upon hours of writing it. And so I guess there's this idea that court happens in the court, but yet, as you're indicating, there's a lot more, I guess, that goes into it. But there's still a lot of, I guess, human behavior that does happen in front of you. And I'm wondering, is there a story you may have or some of the kind of the more interesting or maybe, I don't know, crazier human behavior that you've kind of seen in the courtroom?
We don't have enough days. We don't have enough days to talk about that. It's funny. So I was on the bench for about 24 years, and almost every week I had something happen that made me sit there and pause and think for a moment. Now I've seen it all. And a week later, you find out you haven't. There's no shortage. There's no end to the world of bizarre, irrational behavior that human beings engage in. Sometimes it's not all bad. I mean, sometimes you see some really extraordinary things. But most of the stuff that ends up in a contested setting in front of a judge is, certainly in the criminal world, it involves oftentimes some pretty ugly stuff, certainly in state court. And so, you see a lot of things. Just abusive, horrible behavior.
Is there a criminal case that you remember? And again, you don't necessarily have to say any names, but I think it's all public record that you recall that would kind of typify or exemplify what you're talking about.
Oh, man. Probably the one that stands out in memory was the case that involved the little girl that became known as Precious Doe.
Oh, yeah.
I ended up being the trial judge in that case, and it was tried. There were two defendants. The female pled guilty and cooperated with the state against her ex-boyfriend.
And just to be clear, this was a case where I believe a torso of a young child was found. Yes. I think in another state, even maybe.
No, it was found in the little wooded area off of Watkins Drive, US 71, whatever it's called.
And so a young torso was found, and I still remember the drawing that was put in the newspaper of someone tried to recreate what that child would look like.
They did, and that image, I think, remained in the local media actually for years, because I want to say 4, maybe 5 years went by before they finally developed a suspect who became the defendant who was convicted. But it was such a cold-blooded, heartless, ugly case. Little girl had been crying the mother and the boyfriend had been on a basically binging on crack cocaine for a couple days. The boyfriend kicked the little girl in the head. She bled out slowly and ultimately died, and they knew she was very sick and needed medical care, but chose not to get it because they thought they'd get in trouble, and which of course they probably would have. And when it was all over and done, they've got a dead little girl laying there. The defendant found an old pair of hedge clippers in a garage nearby and used the hedge clippers to cut her head off. And they, in an effort, of course, to prevent her from being identified. And they went on for several years with this story that she stayed in Kansas City because they were from Oklahoma. Anyway, it was something that really caught the attention of a lot of this area as well as really throughout the Midwest. It just pulled at your heartstrings. It was a tough one.
How do you, and I guess explaining or trying to understand human behavior, and I certainly appearing before you and then getting to know you after the bench, you're certainly I would call it a student of the human experience. Like you seem to be, you question, you like to learn. What conclusion do you come that I could help learn from about human behavior when you have individuals doing something so horrific, yet they are human beings doing it? Meaning there's a desire on my part sometimes, and I know clients, and certainly the public, to other the someone, to turn them into something other than human, right? To justify either their understanding of how someone could be so cruel, or to justify a potential punishment, or how we're going to treat someone. How did you reconcile all of that in your mind? Because you had to, as the fact finder, and the jury did too, see those pictures. You had to see pictures of this child. I assume how they found him. You had to hear about the horrific stories that you shared a little bit about. Just when you said shears, I was like shuddering a little bit. How did you reconcile your kind of belief in humanity with what you saw there?
I think the best way to respond to your question is to tell you what I think. It's a fine line. I think one thing you learn, because I did public defender work for 6 or 7 years, I guess, represented a lot of people that did some awful things, got to know them through my representation, seeing how things play out in the courtroom as a judge never changed my mind, which is, as a general proposition, it's a very fine line that separates compliant, law-abiding people from someone who, for whatever reason, something happens and they just go off the deep end and just engage in behavior that nobody could imagine they ever did. If you want to get philosophical about it, there's good and bad in everybody.
Yeah.
And you see it, and it comes and goes, and it's not a constant thing. I mean, people struggle. Some people are challenged from the beginning with the circumstances they're born into. Some people think, I guess what I'm getting at is how behavior becomes normalized. And it's normalized, I think, based upon what you observe from the time you're a toddler up until you get into your early adult years. Everything you've experienced normalizes behavior to you, and something that looks completely abhorrent to one person, it looks pretty normal to somebody else. And so you've got this weird dynamic going on, I think, which explains how people can really diverge from what we consider to be normal behavior.
And then you have probably drugs, alcohol, and everything else that helps trigger.
Mental health is a big, big part of it. So many people that get in trouble in the criminal system have serious mental health history, mental health problems. Most of the time, they're not being treated. It's a mess.
Yeah, I definitely, my working hypothesis, I don't have any answers, John, or at least that I know of, is that we're all capable of the worst things I've ever seen and the best things I've ever seen. All of us are. There's nobody, and a lot of people don't want to accept that, but that's my current.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's, as I said, it's a fine line. It really is.
So you served as a judge, and I know the role is meant to be impartial, but I was wondering how that professional experience affected you personally and has made you more or less judgmental in your private life and when dealing with conflicts. So you practice every day, or you did practice every day. Now you're a mediator, private mediator, every day resolving conflict, judging, whatever. And so did that make you more or less judgmental when you took the robe off and went, into just regular life as just a civilian, if you will, in your own personal life?
Probably no more than I ever was. No, I don't think it was any big development there. I don't think that happened. I think when you get into the habit of hearing evidence and assessing credibility of witnesses, I mean, you do pay more attention to people, what they say, how they say it, body language, facial expressions. I mean, all that stuff plays into credibility assessments. And so you kind of develop those habits, I guess, but I don't walk around scanning the room and judging.
I've determined, as I've been doing this now for like 25 or more years now, I don't know if I've become better or worse at credibility assessments, right? Because I've had people pay me money and sit in front of me, lie to me, and do it really, really well. I've had people on the stand lie. I mean, I can't, sometimes I can't figure out. Sometimes you feel the story is what they're saying is real, but I don't know if that feeling is because it's tugging at my own heartstrings and it feels real inside. But the assessing credibility I found to be just really, really fascinating. But I assume, though, was there ever a situation you can think of when, if you had countered that situation after your tenure as a judge, you might have responded differently or vice versa? Meaning you dealt with something maybe before you were a judge, maybe even in the middle, and you look back now after all the things you've seen and all the things you've had to decide, you would have kind of done differently at the time.
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, there it is. I wonder if my job every day was to be the final arbiter of what's relevant or not to the issue at hand, or what is a fair outcome. I can imagine it would be challenging to have a disagreement with my neighbor or my sibling and remember that out here, their perspective is equally valid. Is that never the case, do you think?
If I understand your question, are other people's opinions valid? Of course they are. Nobody's perfect. Nobody knows everything.
Right.
I would qualify my answer by saying there's a big difference between being immersed into the real-time observation of what's happening in a courtroom and hearing about it on the news or reading about it in what used to be a newspaper when we used to have actual reporters covering the courthouse. Being there and observing it is different than hearing about it and forming your opinion based upon what you hear or read or see on television, because you never get the whole story.
What about personal life? I mean, I guess for me, I was just thinking as I'm asking that question, how many times in my personal life am I really called upon to judge? I'm sitting with my family, someone says something to me. I mean, you know what I mean? How often am I trying to interrogate? I probably might fall into it. My wife might claim, cross-examine, but how often is that really happen? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Where you have to assess the credibility in your personal life. I understand the courtroom talking about the news, but now I'm talking about from a personal perspective, how your qualities as a judge would manifest themselves in kind of personal interactions.
Probably does. It's not something I've ever paid that much attention to, but I imagine it does. Kind of has to. Seems like it necessarily has to. I mean, you kind of get hardwired, Yeah. You develop muscle memory in how you interact with people in a courtroom setting. And I suspect you do some of that in your personal life. I mean, I can't think of a time where I'm thinking about it that way, but I probably do.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that, appearing before you in a number, I've appeared before you in trials, appeared before you in sentencings, pleas, a bunch of stuff. You always seem to be paying attention and listening. And it sounds like maybe that is the skill, right? You have to sit there and listen and at least make me feel like you're listening. Some judges, I would just tell you, some judges don't do that. They'll play on the computer, they'll do all this stuff. You always seem to be attentive to that. And maybe that is the skill, or at least one of the skills.
I think that's the minimal obligation of your duty. I mean, if you're not paying attention, you shouldn't be doing the job.
Well, I agree.
Yeah. No, I tell you, I think it's very important from the perspective of preserving the integrity of the judiciary that everybody in the room, lawyers, parties, witnesses, feels that they're being heard.
Yeah.
Whether that's just watching and seeing that the judge is paying attention, or it's reflected in a decision or an announcement from the bench in some way. It's important, I think, for judges to be there, be present in what's going on, and make sure people understand that you are, in fact, doing your job. It's because it's so damn important to them. I tell you, this is sort of related to what we're talking about. There's a bunch of data that's been developed over the last, I'd say, 20, 25 years regarding how different things that happen in the courthouse affect recidivism rates. And one thing that is really borne out in the data is that what a defendant, and these are for people who are, repeat offenders.
Sure.
What is borne out in the data is that what a defendant remembers from the tone, the tenor of their last sentencing hearing has a lot to do with recidivism.
Wow.
You know this from your PD days. I mean, so many people that get charged in state court, particularly with violent offenses, really never had much of a break.
Right.
Nobody ever told them they're okay. The only thing they ever heard at school, in their homes, was what an idiot, what a jerk, what a this or that. They never get positive reinforcement. And that is such a big thing to recognize, I think. If I can think of only a handful of defendants that I've sentenced where I just thought, this is Ted Bundy. Yeah. This is somebody who is 100% pure sociopathic and will never do anything other than harm people every chance they get. Thank God there's not that many of those people out there. It's a handful. They're out there, but they're very few. Most people are chuckleheads, knuckleheads, or they just get too messed up and hurt somebody that they really probably didn't mean to. They oftentimes mean to, but
sure.
it's a function of other things that are going on. Anyway, I always tried to convey to everybody at a sentencing hearing that this isn't the end of it. This is the beginning of it. Mm-hmm. You're going to go away for a while, and maybe, could be a long while. Could be 20-something years. But you're going to be 47 years old when you get out. You're going to be 52 when you get out. You're going to be a young man still, and you're going to have a life ahead of you. And I'm telling you right now, everybody in this room wants you to come back a better person and to come back and be part of this world, be a father to your children, be a grandfather, a grandmother, whatever it may be. We're going to want you to come back and be that person. Think about this. Please remember this, and good luck to you, kind of thing, And I think there's a lot of value in that, and because I think it works to some degree.
Yeah. I love that, what you're saying that, and I didn't even consider that to be part of judging. But it sounds like part of judging is affirming. At some point, you're affirming their humanity, you're affirming their experience, you're affirming who they are as people, and that's part of, I guess, the role of judge. And I like that. And sometimes all I can do as a criminal defense attorney, sometimes the facts are overwhelmingly bad for my client, oftentimes they are, is to treat the person with respect as they go through the process. It may be a process they wind up in prison, but if I can affirm them in that manner, if you can do that as well, and even the prosecutor can do that well, I think what you're saying is the statistics even bear it out. We have more of a chance that when those individuals get out, and most people do, they're going to be hopefully successful, or at least more successful than they would have been had all of us degraded them in some way throughout the process.
I've run into people in the grocery store, hardware store, who I sentenced years ago.
Right.
And they've recognized me and come up and stand there and very sincerely thank me for saying what I said to them.
Wow.
Now, those aren't people that went away for 25 years, but, it matters.
In many countries, courts don't rely on juries to reach verdicts, which are instead decided by judges or panels of them, depending on the court. whereas in the U.S., jury trials are foundational to our Constitution. While juries represent an aspect of American democracy and perception of justice, they're arguably very expensive, relying on complex methods and rules involved in choosing and informing untrained individuals to take part in determining the outcome of a potentially complicated and lengthy trial. I remember you once told me, John, that how important you think the jury trial is, and that you would not live anywhere that did not have it. And I'm wondering if you could explain this stance. In particular, why is it that you, as a judge for so long, think that judges are not enough?
Well, there's strength in numbers, for one thing. Diversity, a cross-section of the community, the rights that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, the Sixth Amendment. There's a reason it was so very important to the authors of the Constitution. I just rewatched the HBO show about John Adams that came out 20 years ago, maybe. Everybody should watch the first episode if you get the chance. If you haven't seen it, watch the first episode, because a lot of it has to do with the jury trial of the British soldiers that engaged in what we now know as the Boston Massacre. And Adams ended up representing them. And it just so captures, I think, the things that were so important to these guys in the context of being oppressed by the British government at the time. And if you go back and read the first 10 amendments that we know as the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments to the Constitution, 4 of those guarantee the right to a jury trial. And because these guys had all come up in that British tradition, and they'd seen what magistrates can do on their own. In that system, it's still that way in the UK to a large degree, I think. Italy, it's certainly still that way. You've got the same person who is the prosecutor, the judge, and the fact finder, all wrapped into one human being. That's going to come with a lot of risk. Jurors, and I've seen this so many times, when they get together in a county like Jackson County, you've got people who live in the urban area. You've got people that have farms. You've got farmers. I've had jurors who had hogs on a farm out in eastern Jack somewhere. It really is a cross section that you get, and I think it's been obvious for years, and a lot of people have written about it. But diversity leads to better decision making in a group setting, and that's where it really happens. That's where the rubber meets the road in a jury trial. I'm just a big believer in it. And I think jurors, in my experience, have always taken their role very seriously. They work hard on it. Every now and then you'll get somebody who's a bit of a nut. But for the most part, they take their job very seriously and try hard to get to the right spot. And I think 99% of the time they do. They get it right.
Why is it that you, as a judge that's been trained for that long, would trust or put more faith in the jury system than your own decision making as a single individual? And if I'm asking that wrong, tell me. But right, because you're basically saying you have all this experience as a judge, but yet your faith, and I understand the Constitution says it, but it sounds to me like you personally believe potentially that the jury system itself provides a fairer outcome than potentially a one-person decision maker.
I agree with that and believe it 100%.
Why is that?
It's what I just said. It's the fact that you've got a collective group of people from different walks of life, different experiences, coming together, hashing it out, and figuring out what the right result is. I think it's the fact that you've got a broader experience, a broader set of knowledge and skill that no matter who you are, that one person can't match. One person can't match that. So I don't know. Just think it's best.
Relationship between judges and attorneys is interesting. They share a professional background to an extent, but they have very different points of view. I know they work together often, and while clients, defendants, and victims change, but a level of distance of deference. I'm sorry, let me start over again. The relationship between judges and attorneys is interesting to me. because they share a professional background to an extent, but they have very different points of view. And while they work together often, we see the same judges, same attorneys all the time, there's a level of kind of deference and potentially distance that's somewhat required. And I'm wondering, how did you experience these relationships as a lawyer and later as a judge?
Well, I go back to the beginning. I come out of law school and I'm working in the public defender's office, going to court every day, probably 2 or 3 or 4 times a day in front of different judges in Jackson County, and really got a lot of exposure early on
Right.
to the members of the bench at that time. And I was enamored with them. I had a great deal of respect. Most of them deserved it.
Right.
But, you know, I just inherently was very respectful of the whole thing. Growing up, I never knew a lawyer. I mean, I was never around that world. So this was all pretty new to me. And I don't know, it's just kind of the way I was raised, I guess. You naturally have a great deal of respect for someone like that.
But we rub elbows when you're
Yeah.
at personal, parties and things like that. And there's the perception from the public that we're all kind of, in bed together,
Oh, in
which
the
is
club.
not true. I mean, there is a certain amount, but we're all in the same workspace all the time. So that's kind of going to happen. But I'm wondering potentially where you saw that line as you were going through.
Yeah. No, it's true. And especially in a community like ours, there's a lot of lawyers in this town, probably only 300 to 400 of them regularly go to the courthouse.
Yeah.
It's a pretty small group. And so you see a lot of the same lawyers frequently. Less so now because of electronic filing and the latest and greatest doing court on the TV.
Yeah.
But still, you have a lot of contact, a lot of interaction with lawyers. And it's a pretty small group, so you naturally develop relationships, friendships. I never found it difficult to keep that compartmentalized. I could tell you this. I had a couple of close friends who we had an understanding if they had something in front of me that was going to be a fight, something serious, where they thought there was going to be a lot of kind of high-level litigation,
Yeah. that
I would back out of it, not preside over that case. But if it was a run-of-the-mill thing where it was just a matter of processing something, I would handle a case like that with somebody that was a friend of mine. I mean, especially after you've been on the bench for 20-something years, I mean, you really do develop a lot of friendships with lawyers, and I'd never found it difficult to compartmentalize that. I always thought it was important, and I would tell people when I needed to, at the courthouse, no first names.
Yeah.
If you're on the other side of a case from a lawyer and you're standing in front of the bench talking to a judge, and your opponent is addressing the judge by his first name, you're going to feel a little like this doesn't pass the smell test. It doesn't feel right. So I think you got to maintain those kind of boundaries. But outside of the courthouse, I never felt that there was a need to keep a wall up. Obviously, you obey the ethical rules. You don't talk about cases. You
Right.
Do any kind of communication that's improper or unethical.
But I remember one time in your court, I said something to you. I forgot what it was, and you were certainly upset. I remember this with me, and that's fine. I mean, it is. I was a younger public defender, and I remember feeling like I needed to. You certainly didn't make me feel that way, but I felt that way myself. That I had to come back and apologize to you because I had done something disrespectful. I forgot what it was, but I remember it still to this day. And I'm wondering, what about that personal interaction? Meaning, I guess, I don't know, how do you see that when an attorney crosses a line to you? It's something you're going to remember. You're a human being. You see it. And then the attorney that's like, oh, crap. Now, is this judge going to impact my future clients in a bad way? I'm not saying you would have, but at the same time, I'm just telling you what thoughts arise in myself.
Yeah.
And by the way, you did accept my apology, and now we're friends. So, but that was like 20 years ago. But I still remember that.
Well, It's funny you bring that up. I don't remember anything about that. But,
I'm still going through therapy over it, Judge, but sorry.
how many steps into it are you now? I've finished my 10th step. Anyway, when it of course it's situational, depends on the circumstances, but I've always kind of felt like judges have a bit of a duty to take somebody back and talk to them when the circumstances called for it. If somebody did something that was, I thought, over the line and kind of outlandish, if it was very outlandish, I might call them on the carpet right there because they deserve it, a little public lashing. But if it's not of that kind of caliber, I might invite them to stop by some other time or come back now if you have time and just visit about it and say, look, you need to practice the way you want to practice, but from my perspective, I would be careful doing what you just did. There's going to be judges down the road who are going to, hurt you for that. Could hurt your wallet. I mean, it's arguably contemptible. And that's not what happened here today, but you're close. And you need to think about this because you're hurting your reputation. And in this town,
it matters a lot.
It matters because people talk, and you don't want to have that reputation. So think about it. And those conversations usually went pretty well.
And by the way, I had the occasion, fortunately or unfortunately, to not only apologize to judges, but also to prosecutors that I went after personally. I think there is certainly a desire to see the profession get better, maybe, or individuals within it get better, and that's just kind of part of the deal. I'm wondering.
Plus, I think you just enjoy apologizing.
I'm really good at it.
You're really good at it.
Well, I practice so much. I mean, yes, I recall a few times. I'm wondering if you can recall, in addition to me apologizing, a particularly memorable or controversial sentencing decision that you made as a judge.
Well, I've certainly been involved in sentencing decisions that other people thought were controversial.
I know I was thinking about it. We don't have to mention any names.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to be clear, if there's something you don't want, if I step over a line, Judge, just holler at me and I'll apologize. We'll just cut it out. So but I know there was one where you were kind of ambushed by the McDonald's.
Yes.
There was one on and I'm wondering that, how does that impact you? There was what was generally the case? Again, we don't have to go into particulars. And then do you recall being ambushed? And then how do you deal with that personally, I guess?
It's part of the job.
Right.
I was sitting on Independence when Judge Nixon was the PJ downtown. I was sitting in Division 5 out there, and I had a case where a guy pled guilty to a sex offense, which involved his, I think, 10 or 11-year-old daughter, a hand-on genitalia event of some kind. And he pled guilty because of her age. The statute required a minimum 10-year sentence. So it's a contested sentencing hearing. The prosecutor argued for the 10-year sentence. In the midst of all that, the soon-to-be ex-wife of the defendant, the mother of the victim, is in the back of the courtroom, and she raises her hand. She says, "Judge, can I say something?" I said, "Sure, come on up." This woman who was the mother's victim had never talked to the prosecutor. It was a very odd situation. There had been no communication because she didn't understand. Because she said, "Judge, I just want you to know, I think 10 years is too much." This is the mother's of the victim. "I think 10 years is too much. I think he should have to do some time, but 10 years is too much." Just wanted to say that. And I said, "Appreciate that. Thank you." And heard the arguments from both sides and ended up giving him the 10 years, but I suspended it and put him on probation. He had been in the county jail for about 16 months at this point. And he had scored real high on the objective tests that are done to measure likelihood of repeating the offense. Anyway, I think maybe 2 days later, there's a local television show, one of these call for action deals. The mother of the victim had gone to the television station and complained about this light sentence that this judge gave out in Independence. So the whole thing was kind of odd. And I guess this was before, I didn't even know about all this Bill O'Reilly stuff and Jesse Waters. And this is like 15, 20 years ago. But they'd referred the case up to the national Fox News desk, got to Bill O'Reilly. And at the time he was big on hunting down and ambushing judges that they felt were not fairly sentencing people. And he used this guy, Jesse Waters, who now has his own show, I guess, who's a nut job. Anyway, yeah, so they sat on my house and followed me. I was dropping my son off at school. On the way, after dropping him off, I stopped at a McDonald's to get a biscuit. And I walked in, got the biscuit, pay for it, turned to leave, and this camera's like right in my face.
Right.
And Jesse Waters starts screaming at me. I think it's probably still on YouTube.
Yeah, I found it somewhere.
So that's what happened, and it created a lot of controversy, and you get a lot of hate mail.
But I remember you said at that point, listen, if you want to talk to me about it, you got to go through the proper channels, and this isn't proper channels, whatever. I'm wondering, had they gone through the proper channels, what does the judge say about a decision? Would you have said essentially just what you said here? Or?
I probably would have said my decision was my decision, and I explained it in court, and I've got nothing else to add.
Yeah,
that's the decision.
When something like that happens to you and you're called out in some way, it seems like it would impact me, and I may just be more sensitive than you, Judge, but you know what I mean? Like, I mean, my God, you're getting a biscuit at McDonald's, and you know what I mean? Like, you haven't put your armor on for the day yet, I would think. Does that impact you, or you just have the type of personality where just kind of like, you're like, screw it, man, it just kind of rolls off, and you just move on?
It happens. Yeah. I mean, by then, I'd been on the bench for at least 10 years, I think, and I've seen these things happen, so it's not surprising if it happens. It catches you off guard, but I said what I said and turned and walked away and got in my car and went to work.
How was the biscuit, by the way?
Oh, it's always good. The only thing they make that's any good is their biscuit. It's a wicked good biscuit. Yeah.
Has there been a case that's stayed with you for being very challenging professionally or personally?
One that's kind of stuck with me that I really enjoyed doing it. It was a lot of work, but the litigation that came out of the acquisition by HCA, the Hospital Corporation of America, of all the local nonprofit hospital systems, besides St. Luke's.
What was the issue there? The issue was there was a large sum of money that was donated for a charitable purpose. What would happen to that?
So there was the final agreement that was approved, and that was after several years of litigation with the attorneys general offices in Kansas and Missouri. It was a very controversial thing that happened because this for-profit hospital system came in and bought up all the nonprofits, and everyone assumed that they were going to operate as a for-profit corporation operates. That would hurt charitable care, would hurt the existing needs for maintenance and upkeep in the existing buildings. They were all in bad shape because the money those systems at that time couldn't get financing. They couldn't get loans. Banks wouldn't loan money to those nonprofit systems. And so they all kind of got strung out. And HCA was a company that went around and bought up a lot of them. So there was a lot of opposition to it initially. It finally got resolved. Part of the agreement that was in the resolution of the conflict was that HCA agreed to donate, I think it was $500 million in capital improvements to their existing system. There was also a provision that they would do a minimum, I don't remember the numbers, but a minimum amount of charitable care in their systems. So a year or two goes by, they decide to build CenterPoint out in Independence, close down the two existing hospitals that were out there, which was MCI and what was the other one? Can't remember, but
Lakewood? No,
it was Independence Sanitarium.
Okay.
On Truman Road, and then the MCI that was out there off of 23rd Street. Anyway, they spent about $300 million building CenterPoint, and in their accounting to the board that was overseeing the agreement and administering the agreement, they claimed that new construction of CenterPoint fulfilled $300 million of their obligation
of their $500 million obligation, right?
To put into updating capital needs of the existing buildings. So they didn't do that, but they said, no, this counts. So that led to the lawsuit between the foundation and HCA. And that was a bench trial that went on for about 3 weeks with a lot of accounting testimony, forensic accountants. And it involved a lot of money. And it involved a lot of money that was being claimed by the community, that part of the community that needs it.
Yeah.
So that one kind of stuck with me.
Why does that stick with you? You ultimately ruled that $300 million shouldn't qualify within the $500 million.
Right.
And so why is a decision like that? And I could imagine 3 weeks of accounting CPA testimony has just got to be, I don't know if I'd rather be in a murder trial, some horrific murder trial than that, but so why is that sticking with you all these years?
I was just glad I was involved in it. I was just glad I got to participate in it. They appealed my judgment and got some relief at the Court of Appeals. I don't remember the numbers. I had awarded a good deal of money. It was several $100 million to the foundation.
To help the community in
Yes.
the underserved, and also
Yes.
the kind of dealing with the physical plan of already existing structures, which is what they promised to do, it sounds like.
Which was particularly focused on research and Baptist, because they had the greatest needs for that kind of work. Anyhow, the Court of Appeals flipped me on some part of the calculation. I don't remember what it was, but they ended up getting the judgment was brought down a little bit. I don't know. I just remember when that was all over, feeling like, okay, right thing happened for the right reasons.
It's probably still being felt today, I would assume.
Yeah.
I was wondering, so you're a mediator now, and I'm wondering how your role as a mediator compares to your role as a judge. And did you see the courtroom as a space for negotiation? And if so, what was your role in that process? So a lot of people, I should say in Jackson County, I remember there's one particular judge who certainly we know, he's retired now, and he said, well, we're not allowed to negotiate, right? And whatever. And I remember going in the back with Judge O'Malley, who's no longer with us at all. And I remember the prosecutor was standing here, and we were dealing with some revocation of probation. I just looked at the judge and started negotiating directly with the judge. And so I'm wondering how your role as a mediator now, in terms of negotiating, and how that compares with your role as a judge, and whether you're able to engage in that at all.
Yeah. So, when I started, more or less the local custom was what you just described. Judges would be not directly involved in negotiating cases, but the lawyers might want to come back and ask them, hey, here's what we got. What do you think? What are your thoughts about this? What would you see yourself doing?
And we're talking about, just to be clear, because people that are listening might not understand, or even seeing may not fully understand, there's the courtroom and then there's the chambers. And a lot of times we'd say, Judge, can we talk in the back? And the parties would go back through it. There's a door, and we'll go into your office or the other judge's office, and we'd sit in front of your desk. And so that's what you're talking about.
Right. And oftentimes lawyers would, and I did it hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Judge, here's what we got. The offer's this. I don't think it's worth that. If I plead them up to you, what are your thoughts? What would you be comfortable doing? What do you think would be appropriate? That was a pretty common thing.
Yeah.
And over time, it seems like the perception grew that kind of discussion between the court and lawyers violated the prohibition in the judicial ethics code of judges being directly involved in plea bargaining.
Right.
So, it's kind of a gray area. It's not real clear to me one way or the other, but there are certainly times when, and I think particularly in domestic cases, lawyers really want to know, here's what we got. What do you think? Because it helps them settle, helps them get it resolved. It saves their clients money. If they can come in and pre-try the case with a judge, and the judge will tell them, I don't think you can get a maintenance award here. I think you can get a maintenance award. It's probably going to be in the neighborhood of X dollars a month. Child support's probably going to end up here when you put the numbers in the grid and it spits out a number. Lawyers kind of hope that judges will do that because it helps them do their job.
Absolutely.
So
well, and
I never had any problem engaging in that kind of discussion.
Yeah.
I understood it as a lawyer who formally took advantage of it and thought it was helpful. So I never felt like it was crossing the line into ethics problems. But there's a difference of agreement about that.
And just to work for people, it's not as if the state and myself or the feds and myself that we don't know approximately what the right answer is. Like nobody knows. We're going to the judge and he's going to pull it out of the air, or she's going to pull it out of the air. Generally, the parties are within striking distance of each other. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect. And sometimes what you're talking about can really help in settled expectations. The worst thing for me and my client is going to a sentencing judge, and you don't know if they're going to follow the plea agreement. You don't know what they're going to do. It's like rolling the dice when you go in there. So my question is, there's that, and then there's mediation. So are you seeing your role as mediation kind of trying to bridge that gap in a similar way?
It's similar, but it's the dynamic's a little bit different. Because you're not really making a decision. You're trying to convey to people that based upon your experience and knowledge and whatever judge has got their case, that based upon the evidence that's discussed and disclosed to you, you've got a pretty good chance at doing this, pretty bad chance at doing that.
Right.
Probably you ought to think about resolving this. Here's probably where you ought to be looking at. Here's why I think that. And I think so. It's a different dynamic than being the decision maker.
Well, I guess
you're just trying to advise them as to what the range of reasonable outcome is.
But I guess for me, it seems slightly different. When I'm going in the back to talk to you with the state, you will be the decision maker, and you're telling us what you may or may not do, or how this may or may go. As the mediator, as a former judge, you're not going to be the one making the decision, but yet you're almost doing the exact same thing, right? You're talking about, based on my experience as a judge, this is how I see it going. Maybe even this is how I would have ruled as a judge, potentially, or
sure.
I've been around Jackson County forever, and this is where. So I guess to a certain extent there's a similarity there. I am sorry there's less. I remember they spent like $1 trillion in Jackson County to put locks on the doors up there, and it used to be this free flowing thing, kind of, which I really enjoyed. It's certainly formalized. So let's switch gears a little bit. I feel like the coverage judges get in the media is usually quite narrow and politically oriented. Typically, it's either about conflict with the government, about sentencing that might be controversial, or it can be a Supreme Court decision. In a polarized society, we view a decision we like as a reaffirmation of justice, whereas the ones we disagree with we might view as pure politics, extensions of the democratic processes through which judges are appointed. Does that erode the confidence in the courts and their decisions? And if so, what can be done about it?
Oof.
By the way, I want the answer.
I need it.
Yeah,
I need the
seriously.
answer. We're right in the middle of this. I mean, with the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, it's. I think judges, in the eyes of the general population, have really kind of come down in public's perception of their qualities and neutrality. It's not rational. But with the noise that comes out of the White House the last 2 years and 4 years before that, starting in 2017, I mean, that's just the noise out there now. All judges are crooked. Judges are, depends on who they're favoring, and they're crooked and they do crooked things. I mean, you hear that in the news dozens of times every day.
But do you think judges have changed? And I say judges generally. Obviously, the names have changed. Someone else is in Division 14 now. But do you think in general the judges are kind of the same as they've always been? It's just our perception keeps bouncing up and down depending on who's making the most noise?
I think it generally stayed the same. I would carve out an exception to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's never been like this.
In what way?
They're just so partisan. And they're so shirking their duties and responsibilities, I think.
With the shadow docket, you mean?
Yes.
The shadow docket, again, is something they're issuing important decisions that they don't set out their rationale. It's just kind of a one sentence order or something that goes out that creates essentially a precedent that you state that the entire country has to follow.
The court never operated like that. That docket was never used to make decisions in important cases. Now, a lot of that has to do with staying orders, restraining orders. I mean, They're generally not the final decision in a case, but they have an enormous impact on what happens in the underlying litigation when they do that. It's being done in the shadows. That's why they call it the shadow docket. It's being done under cover of night. The Supreme Court has always, I think, recognized an obligation to explain their decisions, to show rationally why they come to the conclusion they come to, and they're not doing that anymore. We've got justices on the U.S. Supreme Court now who should be recusing from cases, but they don't have an enforceable code. They're the only judges in the country, to my knowledge, who don't have a code of ethics. Certainly not one that's enforceable.
Yeah, there's definitely an appearance of impropriety. It's not the impropriety. I'm not saying they're doing something wrong or right, but at a minimum, the appearance of impropriety is something I can look to and say, wow, that helps erode this, and why not just recuse? I mean, what's the downside of recusing? It's one less case. It's one less 150-page judgment you have to write.
Yeah.
So, I always make a point not just to talk about legal issues on the podcast, but also try to glean something out of the topic that would apply to anyone. And I think naturally your work is based on knowledge of the law and interpreting the law, or the correct ways to apply it to a situation. However, we use the phrase having good judgment or poor judgment to describe people's ability to make decisions, and being a good judge of character to describe our intuition about new people. Naturally, as a judge, you might be required to judge whether an attorney is making a reasonable request, balance complex considerations, or ascertain whether someone is being honest in their testimony or sincere in their remorse. These skills are more universal and would be useful to anyone listening to us. And I was wondering if there are any tips or frames of thinking that you could share with our listeners about honing and applying these skills. How can you make me, Judge, a better judge in my daily lives in terms of making decisions? We're confronted with them all the time. And you did that for 25, and you're still doing it essentially as a mediator. I mean, less in that way, but certainly there's got to be some universal skills there that myself and the listeners could take from this, and my parents. I know you were going to give a shout out to my parents.
I mentioned earlier that I know that Richard and Linda are very proud of their son David, as is illustrated here this morning. Yeah.
So, but what universal skills do you think are there to?
I think you have to listen. You have to listen with focus. I think you have to observe. There's as good a guide as any is the credibility instruction that's read to the jury at the beginning of a trial. How to evaluate witness credibility, and probably as much as anything, it's you evaluate credibility as it connects to other stuff that you're hearing and seeing, other evidence in the case. You're evaluating all this. It's a big, it's a puzzle sort of.
Sure.
And if what a witness says is simply not possible because of this fact over here, then they've lost credibility. So, I mean, you have to evaluate things in the context of the whole. You have to, I think, be a pretty good judge of body language, facial gestures, what people do with their eyes when they're talking. It's interesting. I mean, I don't think that stuff is solid and 100% reliable, but it's a factor, People do tell on themselves often.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think as you're saying that, so what the general instructions are for the audience would be to a jury. First of all, you have to be aware of your bias and prejudices. I would say people ask them to set it aside. I don't know how realistic that is, but you at least got to be aware they exist and how they may influence your decision. You need to consider all the evidence before you make a decision, rather than making a decision right at the front and then viewing it all through that. I guess with regard to credibility witnesses, you have to consider their own bias, their own motivation,
sure,
how they're talking, their use of language, what their statement says,
their interest in the outcome.
Yeah, and you have to look at all of that stuff together without focusing too much on any one in order to make, I guess, a reasoned decision. It sounds pretty complicated, actually, Judge.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. Yeah.
Judge, if people want to learn more about what you do, where would they go?
Well, so I'm working full time. I'm practicing law as well as doing mediation and arbitration work. I'm of counsel at a local firm named Morrow Wilnauer Church. Jim Morrow and Gary Wilnauer, Dan Church's firm. It's a fairly small firm that I'm of counsel to, and we're out in South Kansas City, 83rd and State Line, and I'm there every day.
Great.
Yeah.
It was an honor to practice before you, Judge, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
That's kind of you.